As we've been hearing, all the parties here at Holyrood have been mustering their forces ahead of the vote to elect Scotland's new First Minister this afternoon. Let's hear from Scottish Labour's Deputy Leader, Jackie Baillie. Good morning to you, Jackie.
Good morning, Laura.
The outcome of the vote in Parliament today, pretty much a foregone conclusion. Hamza Yusuf will succeed Nicola Sturgeon, but you're going to be opposing his appointment anyway. Why is that?
Well, let me start on a note of consensus, because I do think this is a significant moment for the Scottish Parliament. It's the first time somebody from an ethnic minority background will become the First Minister, and that's a welcome sign of the diversity in Scotland. So having done that point of consensus, let me just
There's
reflect
not that much consensus, because you're going to oppose him this afternoon.
No, of course we are, because when you look at the SNP's record in government, Hamza Yusuf is the SNP's continuity candidate. He inherits a very woeful record in government, and he doesn't inherit Nicola Sturgeon's mandate. So people across Scotland are experiencing record waiting times. 1 in 7 Scots stuck on a waiting list, record numbers of drug deaths, the worst in Europe. The economy is declining, the cost of living crisis is really biting, and this government have no answers. And he is the continuity candidate, described not by me, but another of the leadership candidates as mediocre and more of the same, not being able to cut it anymore. So for that reason, because they've had 16 years in government, and Hamza Yusuf has been part of quite a bit of that, we do need a change. Not because we're saying that, but because the people of Scotland are crying out for change.
It sounds like Hamza Yusuf is exactly the candidate you hoped you would get. There's a source in the Times today saying that Forbes was the bigger threat and it's a good result for us. Lord Fowkes says that Labour will use Kate Forbes' criticism of Hamza Yusuf's record at every opportunity. It doesn't sound like there's going to be much consensus with you and Hamza Yusuf.
I think we will always try and work with government, whoever is in power, to try and make things better for the people of Scotland. But I have to say, we have experience of Hamza Yusuf. You know, as Transport Minister, the trains never ran on time. As Justice Secretary, he trashed the justice system. But as Health Secretary, I have to say to you, without fear of contradiction, he has been the worst Health Secretary in the history of devolution. And I'm worried that what's happened is he simply failed upwards. He's out of his depth and he's incompetent, and I worry for the country as a consequence of that.
And yet, even if there was a snap election tomorrow, which is what Anna Sarwar's calling for, you'd lose to Hamza Yusuf, who you say is such a big failure.
Well, I think if you look at the polls, the trend is very much towards Labour. We've moved from 3rd place into 2nd. And if you look at the favourability of all of the parties, we are punching well above our weight. I think the people of Scotland are crying out for change. And of course, we would work for every single vote. We take nothing for granted. But I do think this is a reset moment. And I'm not convinced that Hamza Yusuf has the depth of character required to be the First Minister of Scotland.
There will be a general election at some point next year. What do you think? You say there's this jump in favourability towards Labour. What do you think that will mean in terms of seats?
Well, I'm not going to come on and predict seats, but let me say to you that every time
What's your aim, then?
every time the poll changes, more seats come into view as possibilities. But ultimately, what matters here is us winning the votes of the people of Scotland. That requires hard work. We take nothing for granted. But I have to say,
what are you aiming for, though? Give us some idea about how many seats you're aiming for.
Let me genuinely say to you, the SNP can only oppose the Tories, but it's only Labour that can actually boot the Tories out of Downing Street. Obviously, we want to add to the 1 seat we have in Scotland. I'm not going to trade numbers with you, but let me say that there is a huge mood shift going on in communities across Scotland that I think is a really positive sign of Labour being able to boot the Tories out, not just in Scotland,
it's going to have to be a massive mood shift, though, because Labour is still a party of Brexit, and 2/3 of Scotland still supports membership of the EU. There's no point them voting for you if they want to be in the EU.
Well, there is a point, because firstly, there is a mood shift across the country. People are experiencing a real cost of living crisis, and Labour have some of the answers to actually start a better future for Scotland and indeed across the United Kingdom. We've got a plan to tackle the cost of living, bringing down energy bills. We've got a plan to jumpstart a green jobs revolution in Scotland, and that would create something like 50,000 jobs, growing the economy, investing in opportunities for the future. And can I just say, saving
But at
the
best,
NHS is top of the list for most of my constituents.
and that's a devolved issue, and at best in Scotland, whatever happens, you'd still only be in second place.
But I have to say to you, it may be a devolved issue, but we benefit from spending from the UK government. Labour have come forward with radical plans to increase the number of doctors, nurses, allied health professionals that are being trained, district nurses as well. We would get a share of that money to invest in the NHS in Scotland. That's what my constituents want to see, and that's what people across Scotland want to see right now, because the NHS
Jackie,
is on the brink of collapse.
we must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Scottish Labour's Deputy Leader there, Jackie Baillie.